What the heck are jewel tones? Now don't feel bad if you've asked yourself this question before, because unless you're an interior designer or some sort of color nerd like me, then it's highly possible that jewel tones aren't something you're exactly familiar with, at least by terminology. I feel like this is also closely related to how popular non-jewel tones have been in interior design over the last decade or so, so there's not really been a need to search out these pretty awesome colors. I'm sure we're all used to colors like gray, beige, and any combination of the two. Now, being the paint people, we mainly talk about painting and decorating on this channel, so I wanted to explain jewel tones in the context of paint and paint colors specifically. I'll also touch on stuff outside of the realm of paint as well. Not only am I going to explain the concept to you, but I'll also give you a couple of my current favorite colors within the jewel tone category. So to start things off, I'm pretty sure most of you know what jewels are. And when we're talking about jewel tones, they really go hand in hand. Jewel tones are colors that are used in design, and for our purposes, we can say interior design. And they're derived from the precious gemstones that we all know and love. Rubies, sapphires, emeralds, amethyst, and topazes. What's notable about jewel tones is their high level of saturation and richness. Think of gorgeous green, powerful purple, radical red, beautiful blue, and yellows that you love. Jewel tones are definitely meant to create a statement and have a real dynamic impact when utilized, but they don't necessarily always need to be the brightest version of themselves to be classified as jewel tones. Oftentimes these colors, when represented in paint, are actually sometimes toned or shaded with a bit of gray or black to deepen them even further. For example, this color is an extremely bright green, like really bright. And although this one is a bit less vibrant, I would still classify it as a jewel tone, even though it contains more black. And in fact, I would say that's even more of a usable jewel tone because of that shaded quality. You'll often see some jewel tones have this very subtle dusty or smoky effect, especially when utilized in more otherwise muted color palettes. It's still going to pop and stand out like crazy, especially when you surround it with classic gray, for example, and it's because it's a saturated color that's contrasting to neutrals instead of just being the brightest color possible amongst other colors. If you're tired of that monochromatic grayscale look and are feeling a little more adventurous, creative, and most importantly, opulent, it's like my favorite word these days, then these colors are for you. Before we get into some jewel tone examples that I love, let's quickly talk about how they are most commonly used in interior design. Well, we already talked about one use case before, and that's allowing one color or two colors to be the accents in an otherwise minimalist decor. If the room you're designing uses a lot of off-whites and maybe light warm grays, by having a single pop of hunter green or mustard yellow, that's going to be enough. When you're picking the color in this situation, you don't need the deepest green or the brightest yellow. You'll probably be fine with the second deepest green or the third brightest yellow. I'm not trying to scare you off of the super saturated stuff, but just be mindful that jewel tones, by definition, are already pretty bright, even the more mellow ones. So just a pop of color here and there, that's a great way to implement them pretty easily. And sometimes it doesn't even take a can of paint. The most common way I see people using these jewel tones in their decor are with things like decorative throw pillows on the couch. And this is perfect if you're rocking a lot of neutrals, because instead of repainting everything or getting a new couch, just grab a couple pillows from wherever you get pillows. Amazon. I feel like that's sacrilege. Amazon? Throw pillows? But what if you're tired of those neutrals and you want more than just a pillow or two? Well, then the next way to infuse some beautiful gemstone goodness into your color palette is of course with paint. You can opt for that same slightly toned down effect with those jewel tones that are a little bit dusty and pick some pale greens or dusty roses. And this is what I would recommend for a lot of those people out there that are still in that transition phase of going from gray to gold. It's a big jump, right? So tread softly. I can't stress this enough. Even a color that has half the strength of something else, it's still going to have a much more noticeable color hue than something like a Revere pewter, for example. And that's because Revere pewter is neutral. Jewel tones, they're not meant to be. Now, if you wanted to bask in all of the jewel tone glory than by going with the richer color options available like Salamander and Dinner Party. Those are going to have maximal impact. You can also start to implement color theory with your jewel tones and incorporate some complementary color pairings that contrast one another and are opposing on the color wheel. But I tend to favor more consistency if I'm using them on things like walls where they're taking up a lot of visual space. Because these colors are already super saturated, you don't necessarily want to overwhelm the old eyeballs by having big bold colors in big doses and then also having them competing with each other in complementary fashion. Try and pick and choose what you want to do for the best effect. Do you really want bold, bright jewel tones? Do you want them to be complementary with one another like reds and greens or yellows and purples? And do you want them all over the home? If you've answered yes to all three of these questions, then Godspeed. All I'm saying is maybe you only need one or two of those criteria to be met to achieve the look you're going for. I find I have more success in putting jewel tones together when I'm opting for colors that are darker and richer in general, which goes back to the whole shades and tones thing. Tones contain added gray to give them that dusty look, and shades have added black for that deeper, dramatic look. Those types of choices are going to be delightful to look at, and they're going to be easier to live with in the long run. So why don't I go ahead and give you some examples of different jewel tones that I like to use? Would that be helpful? Well, you can really take it in so many different directions here in terms of color hue and depth, but I'll give you 3 levels of jewel tones that are appropriate whether you're looking for a pop of color here and there or something to go full out with. A nice little entry level or gateway drug jewel tone is a very soft, slightly dusty pink called Marry Me. Settle down, people. I'm just kidding. Stupid. Although this is a color that you would not traditionally think of as a gemstone type of color. That is unless you're a purveyor of pink diamonds, because that's kind of what you're getting here. It just goes to show you that you don't need to pick the deepest, darkest, most dynamic colors in order to fit a nice jewel tone type of color palette. And in fact, by incorporating an airy but still somewhat deep pink color, it can really do a great job at breaking up some of those heavier colors that you may be wanting to incorporate together. The next level of jewel tones are colors that are definitely more saturated, but perhaps have a neutral base, but the color hue within them is amped up a little bit more. Sort of like the color dark mustard. At first glance, you may think it's just kind of a brown, but it brings in this lovely golden orange warmth that takes it to another level. If there was a condiment that reflected what jewel tones look like, you would either be looking in the jam section or the mustard section, because whether you go with a more brown leaning mustard like this, or even a more vibrant yellow one, they suit jewel tone palettes pretty perfectly. But what about the go for broke jewel fanatics out there? I know most of you came for those big and bold, beautiful colors that you can't wait to cover your living room in. And when I think of jewel tones, I'm not gonna lie, colors like deep sea green come straight to my brain. This is one of those quintessential examples of jewel tones because it has an LRV under 7, making it a very dark color. And that's because it does have that added dose of black that is always nice, but not enough where it'll take away from how beautiful and regal and vibrant it is as a green rather than an off black. Colors like this really excite me because it opens up the door to an endless number of combinations that all have one thing in common: opulence. One more thing, if you like that last color we talked about, you really need to see this one because it's one of my favorite accent colors by Benjamin Moore. It's so good.